Ladies and gentlemen, we've got another update in the US-China trade war, tariff war situation. The Chinese quietly exempting nearly 25% of all US imports from tariffs, possibly blinking a little bit more. Now, it was reported a few weeks ago that the United States was exempting certain things like electronics, and it was said to be the total number of imports from China that the United States was exempting was around 25%. Let me correct myself, not exempting, but bringing back down to the initial tariff level. Because Trump put around a 20% flat tariff on China and then started escalating it more and more, and now it's around 145%. So he brought it back down to 20%. China seemingly is also exempting the United States around 25% of the imports coming in from the US. So it seems like both countries now on an even playing field in terms of certain exemptions, although the United States still does have a flat 20% tariff on everything from China, including the semiconductors, including all the electronics. There was talk about iPhone production and whether or not we could get Apple to mass produce iPhones in the United States. I do think eventually it will happen. From what I've heard, I think it will happen once the robotics evolves to the point to where they're going to have robots mass producing iPhones in the US. That's just my opinion. I do think it looks like right now there's an effort from the United States and India, who've got a massive economy themselves, and certainly the population, to have a manufacturing superpower. Seems like India is the United States ace up their sleeve, if you will, in terms of being able to continue production of things without needing China. And you might say, well, what's the purpose of that? Weren't we trying to bring jobs and manufacturing back domestically? Well, you can't do it in a year. Everything has to be built up. The manufacturing, the factories, they've all got to be built. You can't just automatically start it just next Sunday. It takes time. So the thought process is, and it looks like the United States does have a good relationship with India. It does seem like, based on how high India's GDP is and how big their economic might is, it seems like the United States will be using India as a way to possibly suffocate the Chinese, along with other countries like Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, and others. And so the idea is, well, if we come to the negotiating table and we do deals with all of them before China, remember, it's come out that China does not want these countries to negotiate with the United States because they know they'll lose leverage when it comes to their negotiation with the United States. But if it happens within the next few months, there's already been talk. We saw Vance go to India. He announced that the negotiations were formally open for a new trade deal with India. And I think once that gets announced, it's going to be a big gut punch to the Chinese, because it's going to allow the United States to rotate a lot of the things they normally got from China to be able to receive them from India. And that's not to say, well, India's our new China. It's just we don't have the domestic production. And that's also why people say, well, if Trump goes through with these tariffs, and I've said, I think at a certain point, possibly maybe early fall, late summer, Trump is going to have to say, okay, for this administration, unless something crazy changes, we're going to have this tariff on here, we're going to have this tariff on here, this tariff on here. You have to be open about it for the markets and open about it for the companies that you want to produce, to have produced domestically, because otherwise they'll just go to other countries to do it. You have to say, well, we're tariffing this, we want this produced domestically. We're tariffing that, we want this to produce domestically. And we're committing fully to the tariff, like he did with the auto tariff. Now we'll see if he sticks to that, but he did say with the auto tariffs, he's going to commit to them for the full 4 years, and hopefully it extends beyond then, because you're going to have more domestic auto production. And if you have that, you can keep the tariffs on, and it forces the production to continue within the United States. So the way I read this, I kind of had an epiphany when it comes to this US-China trade situation. And we understand that. See, the thing is, the stuff coming out of China versus the United States, people saying it's hitting the US hard, the S&P 500 has fully recovered from Liberation Day. If you guys remember Liberation Day, it was a shock to everyone. They said that it was already priced in, and now with a month of price action within the stock market, maybe it was previously priced in. There was just some craziness at the beginning, but Liberation Day was April 2nd. The market tanks April 3rd. The market tanks April 4th. Everyone thinks that next Monday is going to be Black Monday. It doesn't do anything. The yield goes crazy, and then Trump removes all of the heavy tariffs. But nobody expected Trump to hit every country that was importing, really every country overall. That's why they're saying islands that were just penguins. It's like, why would Trump do that? Well, it's because countries are able to use those islands that are not necessarily owned by anyone as a way to manipulate the tariffs and get around them by using those islands as facilitators. But he tariffed everything, and you're tariffing countries at 90%, 100% rates. Everyone thought it was going to be reciprocal. It wasn't reciprocal. It was based on the trade deficit. So it was a shock to the economy. The economy has recovered. And even Democrats are like, wait, what's going on here? How's this possible? Because it's like you do the craziness of Liberation Day, and a month later, without any amazing bullish news. Now, you might say, well, the market is thinking they know that Trump really does look at the stock market, and trust me, he does 100%. He always brags when it's good. He's a multi-billionaire. He's a businessman. He's been looking at it for decades. And he would always tweet when Obama was in about how bad the stock market was doing in certain times to try and grade Obama based on that. Same thing with Biden. Same thing when it was doing well in 2018, 2019 when he was in. And then 2020 COVID happens. That's not his fault. But the point of it is we haven't even had much bullish news, but the market, I think, understands that when something happens that causes some really bad price action, Trump normally self-corrects. And I'm not even sure it was the market. I think it was more so the yield, the 10-year yields, the U.S. Treasuries, the rating that they got on that was so bad. And that's one of the reasons they got off of the whole reciprocal tariff and said, okay, it's just 10%. We're going to give you a 90-day negotiating window to all the countries outside of China. And so when it comes to this war, let me just talk about just the overall point. The United States is always, just from an economic perspective, going to have leverage over the Chinese. They tariff us at 125%. We tariff them at 145%. They have a massive surplus with us. They're very reliant on us. There's this huge news that came out on Monday that all the ports in Seattle, the massive Seattle port, there were no cargo ships. Well, yeah, all the cargo ships were stuck in the Chinese ports, and it hurts China a lot more than it hurts us because of their surplus with us. China has, for the better part of the last decade, been trying to decouple themselves from the United States and utilize other countries for trade. It's been slow, but it's been happening. The United States put tariffs on China 2018, 2019 under Trump. They kept them on under Biden. They're very good for leverage and negotiations. Trump goes crazy now and says, we want them to fully submit to us, and we will have the leverage over China, and it will hurt China as long as Trump maintains the tariff level and doesn't give in. The issue is, even though that tariffs are going to hurt the Chinese a lot worse than they're going to hurt us, because of the control that the CCP has and their dictatorship, not a democracy, over their people, as opposed to us with a democracy, their quality of life, a lot of their citizens' quality of life in China is a lot worse than the United States, so they can absorb a more punishing economic system. They had horrible deflation. They had zero COVID policies in 2022, 2023. Their economy was in a horrible spot. We don't know how bad it actually is because they blatantly lie about their numbers. They lie about youth unemployment. It got to the point they had like 20% youth unemployment in 2023. They said, we're not reporting it in 2024. That's what they do. They lied about all their COVID numbers in 2020. They lie about their population by about 150 million people. They constantly lie. So it's hard to know for sure. But the point is, even though this situation to where we're tariffing each other because they have a surplus with us is going to hurt them more than it's going to hurt us, because our quality of life is better, and because we have a democracy where liberals have a lot of say, even though they don't have necessarily the political power in government, there's going to be more pressure on Trump than even the CCP. And on top of that, they can just say, well, we're responding, and we're going to fight the big bad United States for doing this to us when we have the free trade agreement, which we know, based off of the slave labor, it's a lot easier for them to mass produce things. They constantly steal our ideas and reproduce them at cheaper prices in China. It's a big issue. But we will have the leverage. But the problem is the leverage necessarily, because we're playing within like different ball games. It's like we're shooting at different baskets. U.S. citizens will not take the same economic turmoil that Chinese citizens will, for a variety of reasons. But overall, I think the point is this. And look, the Chinese are very noble. They're not going to back down to the United States and just give us this free deal, whatever it ends up being. It's not how it works. I had to turn the light on. It's really dark out right now. because we got like the late spring storms. But I lost my train of thought. The point is this. The point is this. If we can isolate the Chinese, we will really allow ourselves to, and it's not even like we're negotiating with China, we're negotiating to put ourselves in a better position to be more self-sufficient. And even China has to realize that this is what they've been trying to do for the better part of the last decade. So we can have a solid deal with China. It's not going to be this crazy capitulation. That's just how the Chinese are. They're not going to do that. But if we can have trade deals with Japan, with South Korea, with India, with Vietnam, countries around China within the East, that is going to put pressure on the Chinese. And it's also going to make us look better in terms of just the Trump administration being able to control the narrative. Because now we've got all these agreements to where there's not all these tariffs on everyone. And there's a lot more that's known when it comes to investing. There's a lot less murkiness. And so that's the idea. And then, okay, now we've got China isolated. We'll do a fair deal with you, whatever that ends up being. But it would put us in a better position to negotiate with China if that were to happen. When it comes to them exempting 25%, liberals will just say, well, Trump also exempted around 25%, which is honestly, it's not true because they're still being hit with a baseline 20% tariff, but it is true. There is around 25% of imports right now from China, I believe, that were exempted down to the 20% because it's electronics and it's semiconductors. I mean, they exempted the semiconductors for Taiwan as well. So it's not just China, and I think the Taiwans have no tariff on them. But either way, guys, that's just the situation when it comes to this. China is exempting certain things. It is hurting China more. Their citizens will absorb more hardship because a lot more of them are in poverty and they have a worse standard of living there, quality of life, and they have less overall say when it comes to their government. In the United States, in the West, the democracy, any little thing that goes bad, there's going to be significant pressure on Trump. The reason why that's so important is because you talk about it. I mean, even the approval situation for Trump, they're saying, well, now the economy, everything's terrible. It's really not. What the media did is they did a great job of capitalizing on the 2-day crash that we saw, which happened right after Liberation Day. And it was just like constant, the market's horrible, tank, tank, tank. It's already fully recovered from all of that crazy, where Trump entered the White House was like +5 in terms of economy. Now he's -15. And we've already recovered it without any trade deals, without any crazy bullish news, without any interest rate cuts, with lower inflation, by the way, lower trueflation. And again, that's going to be another big thing when it comes to them cutting interest rates. That's why we think it's going to happen in June and not May, because the Fed is waiting for us to negotiate some of these free trade deals. And once that happens, they're going to say, okay, the tariffs, even though they're still on China, they're not going to be nearly as inflationary because they've been removed off of a lot of these countries. So the threat level is not nearly there. And now the trueflation is down at 1.3%. That will enable us to cut the rates. That will enable us to stop QT. And they said they're going to ease QT, and they're already starting to do it. And so we'll see if they start QE possibly early 2026. That's what I heard. But either way, guys, this is, it's important for Trump to hold stern at this point. You have to hold stern with China, and you have to be very, very firm when talking about this situation. And Trump's already taken a hit in terms of his approval rating. Trump could have printed more money, done the fake Biden stuff. I mean, you see the jobs report come out, another amazing jobs report for Trump. And what you're seeing is, and you know what? I've got other stuff. I really got to start showing some of this other stuff. Look at this. S&P 500 erased its Liberation Day losses. So it lost like 700 points, and it's trading above where it was on April Fool's Day, which was the day before. And you've also got this update. Full-time workers plus around 300K, part-time plus 56K, the exact opposite of the Biden administration, where they would keep bragging about adding part-time workers, and then they would lie about the amount of jobs that they gain and then have to revise it like 4 or 5 months later. These are great job numbers. They were fear-mongering about them. We're getting good indicators right now. And listen, we're going to be in a very good position as long as we negotiate some of these deals. Like, we get this India deal done. The propaganda, the narrative we're going to be able to spin against China when it comes to that, the pressure we can exude on them is going to be glorious. And you're talking about Japan, you're talking about other countries like South Korea. That's what we're looking at right now. And obviously the UK, the EU, you want the big boys involved, but it's those East Asian countries that would really, really help us put pressure on China, because we're going to need it. And the fact that we have the leverage is only as good as the amount of pain your citizens are willing to take, if that makes sense. It's just the Chinese citizens will endure a lot more pain than the American citizens, not because they want to, because we live in a democracy where there's constant people. That's the thing. It's like, you know, if you give Trump 10 years to where he doesn't care about his approval rating for the first 5 or 6, we could totally reform the entire system and make it a lot better for regular middle class people, by the way. But we can't do that. So it's like anything that happens that's an immediate, because economics, there's a pro and a con every single time you do something. So when Trump does the tariffs, it's going to be an immediate negative. And so there's pressure. Well, no, the purpose of yes, there's going to be an immediate negative reaction, but you have to keep them on to recognize the fruits of the tariff. The idea that the Senate would come out and say we want this, and Republicans like Rand Paul and Collins Murkowski voting against it, we're too far in at this point. We've committed to it and we've already recovered. And now comes the deals. And Trump's already lowered the tariffs to 10%, a flat 10% rate on everyone outside of China anyways. So it's like, why would we, when we're not at the finish line, but we're coming to the finish line in terms of now negotiating with these countries, which will also pigeonhole China more, as long as, and I would imagine this is the negotiations, within the negotiations, the countries are not allowed to import products from China and then export them to the United States, to where China gets to use the country as a proxy trade option for the United States. So it's not gonna be allowed in the negotiation. So I think, you know, we're in a good spot right now. China, you can say, well, they caved in, whatever. You know, both of these countries are angling for certain things and kind of seeing how they can survive, because they know this is probably going to be another few months before there's a trade agreement. So they're saying, well, we have to, I mean, I almost wonder if there was a deal behind the scenes between Apple and Trump, in terms of Apple committing to something and saying, you need to lower because remember, there was a report like days before Liberation Day, Apple had like 4 cargo planes filled with iPhones to try and beat it. So I mean, you know, it was dire for them. You have to wonder if there was an agreement. I know Apple has committed to investing billions and billions and billions of dollars domestically under Trump. That recently came out. But I just wonder if there was an extra agreement. But either way, guys, make sure you like this video down below. That's going to do it for this one. Also, follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.